The day I walked across that stage in my white coat, I heard a whisper that froze me in place. It was my ex-husband's mother, Linda. She leaned toward someone in the crowd and said, "She was supposed to fail. How is she standing up there?" She didn't know I heard her, but her words settled deep inside me. In that moment, everything I had survived came rushing back. The doubt, the insults, the long nights of studying alone. I realized my success wasn't just a surprise to them. It was a threat. And maybe that was the sweetest part of all of it. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a small town where money was always short, but dreams were free, and becoming a doctor was the only one I held on to. I learned early that nothing in life came easy, but I also learned how to push forward even when the world tried to pull me back. That strength carried me through most of my life, until I met Aaron Bennett. Aaron walked into my life when I was 24. He was handsome, charming, and he had a way of speaking that made me feel like the world could be warm. For a while, I believed he was the partner I had been hoping for. Someone who would encourage me, someone who would stand beside me no matter how difficult things got. I didn't know then that people can smile at you while quietly sharpening a knife behind their back. Not long after we married, the warmth started to fade. Aaron became someone I barely recognized, short-tempered, dismissive, annoyed whenever I talked about school. But even his behavior didn't compare to what I faced with his parents, Linda and Charles Bennett. From the first day I stepped into their house, they made it clear I didn't fit their standards. Linda would glance at my clothes and give me a tight smile, as if she was trying to hide her disgust. Charles would ask little questions that sounded polite, but were really meant to poke at my past. Questions about my humble background. Questions about whether I had thought about a more realistic career. It didn't matter what I achieved. To them, I was always a girl from the wrong side of town who dared to dream too big. And Aaron? He never defended me. Not once. Sometimes he would even join them, laughing at their comments, acting like my dreams were some childish phase I needed to outgrow. The man who once encouraged me slowly became the man who made me doubt every step I took. But I didn't give up. Even when I felt small, even when their voices echoed louder than my own, something inside me refused to break. I didn't know it then, but the same people trying to tear me down would soon be the ones forced to watch me rise higher than they ever expected. And that moment, standing in my white coat, was only the beginning of that realization. When I finally received the acceptance letter from the pre-med program, I remember standing in the kitchen with the envelope shaking in my hands. It felt unreal. This was the first big step toward the dream I had carried since I was a child. When I told Aaron, he smiled. At least, that's what it looked like at first. He hugged me and said he was proud, but his voice didn't have the warmth I expected. There was something tight in his tone, something forced. I chose not to think too much about it, because I wanted to believe he meant it. At first, he acted supportive. He said he would help me balance school and home, that we would figure it out together. But the moment my classes started, his behavior changed like a switch had been flipped. Anytime I sat down to study, he suddenly needed something. Dinner, laundry, company, anything that kept me from focusing. If I went to the bedroom with my books, he would follow me and start talking loudly about random things. If I went to the living room, he turned on the TV or complained that I wasn't spending enough time with him. At first, I thought it was just adjustment, but it was too deliberate to ignore. His parents didn't make things any easier. When we visited them, Linda would give me a look like I was doing something wrong just by carrying a textbook. She would say things like, "Emily, being a good wife is a full-time job," or, "It's cute that you still talk about being a doctor, but maybe you should focus on building a stable family." Charles would nod in agreement, almost like my dreams were a joke they all silently shared. I tried to stay polite, but inside I felt smaller each time. Every time I returned home from their house, Aaron would be tense. He would start arguments over little things, how I cleaned, how I cooked, how much time I spent at school. If I told him I needed to prepare for an exam, he accused me of caring more about books than our marriage. Sometimes he would take my car without telling me, so I couldn't get to campus on time. Other times he'd pick fights the night before an important test, keeping me awake for hours and ruining my focus the next day. I started noticing how different he was when he talked about his own achievements. If something went well for him at work, he bragged for days. But whenever something good happened to me, his face tightened like he was fighting jealousy. He never admitted it, but it was clear. My progress made him insecure. He didn't want a wife who would rise higher than him. The fights became predictable. I would try to explain my schedule, and he would twist my words until I ended up apologizing for trying too hard. I could feel the ground shifting under me, little by little. The home that was supposed to be peaceful turned into a place where I walked on eggshells. The support he once pretended to give had disappeared completely, replaced by subtle ways of holding me back. What hurt most was realizing he wasn't sabotaging me by accident. He was doing it on purpose, slowly, quietly, hoping I wouldn't notice. But I did. And each day, his behavior showed me more clearly who he truly was. It didn't take long before Aaron stopped pretending. The small comments he used to make turned into sharp, open insults. One evening, while I was reviewing anatomy notes at the table, he looked at me with clear irritation and said, "You're not smart enough for med school anyway. Why are you stressing yourself over something you'll never finish?" He said it casually, almost like he was stating a fact. I felt something drop inside me, but I bit my tongue because arguing with him never ended well. His mother only added more pressure. Every time I visited, Linda brought up the topic of children as if it were the only thing that mattered. She would say, "Emily, you're not getting any younger. You should be focusing on starting a family, not wasting your time in classrooms." She always said it with a sweet smile that didn't match her words. It was clear she didn't care about my goals. To her, I was just the woman who needed to give her a grandchild. If I tried to explain that I wanted to finish school first, she would sigh dramatically and say, "Some women just don't know their priorities." Charles had his own way of making me feel small. He liked to joke about where I came from, asking questions that felt more like digs. "Remind me," he would say, "what did your parents do again? Must have been tough growing up like that." He pretended it was harmless conversation, but the look in his eyes told the truth. They all saw my background as proof that I didn't belong in their family or in a profession like medicine. Around this time, Aaron's behavior shifted in another way. He became secretive with his phone and started leaving the house earlier than usual. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but the signs were there. He became distant, cold, and annoyed whenever I mentioned anything related to school. One night, I overheard him talking quietly on the phone. He was discussing job offers in another state, jobs he had applied for without telling me. When I confronted him, he brushed it off and said, "I thought moving might help you realize med school isn't the right path. We need a new start, Emily." But I knew the truth. Moving would mean I'd have to quit the program I had worked so hard to enter. This wasn't about a fresh start. It was about control. The worst blow came a few weeks later. I noticed he kept mentioning a coworker named Sabrina Lewis. At first, it was small things, her jokes, her work habits, her problems. Then he started comparing me to her, saying she understood him better because she didn't obsess over school. His phone buzzed constantly, and whenever I asked who it was, he snapped at me. One afternoon, when he left his phone on the counter, a message from her popped up. It wasn't explicit, but it was intimate enough to make my stomach twist. They weren't sleeping together, not yet, but they had crossed a line. She called him someone who gets her, and he told her he wished he could talk to her every night. It was emotional infidelity, and it tore through me like a blade. Standing there with his phone in my hand, I realized something painful but clear. The man who promised to love me was slowly trying to break me, piece by piece. And while I was fighting for a future, he was already planning a life that didn't include me, or my dreams. The breaking point came on a night that looked ordinary at first. I had just finished a long day of classes and work, and all I wanted was a quiet evening to study for an exam. But the moment I walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. Aaron was pacing the living room, already irritated about something I didn't even understand. It didn't take long for the argument to start. It never did. He complained about the dishes, about the laundry, about dinner. Not because he cared, but because he needed something to use against me. I tried to ignore him and walk to the bedroom, but he followed me, raising his voice with every step. I finally turned and told him I needed to study, hoping he would calm down. Instead, he stepped closer, eyes full of anger, and said the words that stayed with me longer than anything else he had ever thrown at me. "You'll never be a doctor. You can't even take care of this house." For a moment, everything around me went silent. His voice echoed in my mind like a stamp meant to remind me of who he thought I was. Someone small, someone useless, someone who should have given up long ago. But instead of breaking me, those words did something else. They showed me how far I had fallen inside this marriage. I looked at him and realized he didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as someone he needed to keep beneath him, someone he could shape into what made him comfortable. It hit me then that I had been trying to survive, not live. I wasn't building a future. I was trapped in a life that kept shrinking. The house felt like walls closing in. The man standing in front of me felt more like a cage than a husband. That night, after he stormed off to the living room, I walked into the bedroom and stared at my textbooks on the desk. They were the only constant in my life, the only pieces of myself I hadn't let go of. I opened a suitcase, placed the textbooks inside, added a few clothes, and zipped it shut. My hands shook, but not from fear, more from the finality of it. I didn't wait for him to notice what I was doing. I didn't explain myself. I simply picked up the suitcase and walked out the door. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt different. Cold but freeing. I didn't have a plan, and I didn't know how I was going to manage school, money, or life on my own. But I knew staying would destroy every part of me. The next morning, I called a lawyer and told them I wanted a divorce. Aaron didn't take it quietly. He tried everything, begging, guilt-tripping, threatening to ruin my reputation, even promising to change. But I had finally seen the truth. None of it was real. None of it would ever be enough to fix the damage. Filing those papers was terrifying, but it was also the first decision I made for myself in years. It was the start of choosing my future over his comfort, my dreams over his control, my life over his shadow. And I didn't look back. The first year after leaving Aaron felt like stepping into a storm without an umbrella. I moved into a tiny studio apartment close to campus. It was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but it was quiet, and for the first time in years, no one was yelling at me. I worked 2 part-time jobs just to keep myself afloat, one in a campus library and another at a small cafe down the street. Most days I rushed from work to class and back again, barely stopping long enough to breathe. The money was never enough, but I learned to stretch every dollar. Some nights, dinner was just a piece of bread and tea, but I kept going because stopping wasn't an option. The pressure slowly built on me. Med school wasn't easy to begin with, and trying to balance jobs, rent, and homework made every day feel like a race I was always behind in. There were nights when I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by textbooks, feeling like the weight of everything was pressing down on my chest. Panic attacks became a quiet part of my routine. They showed up when I least expected them, during study sessions, on the bus, even while I was making coffee at work. I would take deep breaths and force myself to focus, because I knew falling apart would only set me back further. Even through all that, I refused to quit. I reminded myself of every insult Aaron had thrown at me, every time he said I wouldn't make it, and I turned those words into fuel. I didn't have anyone cheering for me, but I had something else. The determination to prove to myself that I deserved to be here. During one difficult semester, I met Dr. Michael Harper, a professor who taught one of my toughest classes. He noticed how hard I worked, how often I stayed after lectures to ask questions, and how I pushed myself even when I clearly looked exhausted. One afternoon, he asked me to stay back. I thought I had done something wrong, but he simply said, "You remind me of someone who fought hard for everything she achieved. Don't lose that fire." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in a long time. Over time, he became a mentor, someone who guided me, encouraged me, and believed in my potential when I barely believed in myself. While I was fighting to stay afloat, news of my life somehow made its way back to Aaron. Instead of leaving me alone, he found a new way to hurt me, through rumors. I heard from a classmate who still lived near my old neighborhood that Aaron was telling people I had dropped out and was never cut out for medicine in the first place. He said it like he was sharing the sad truth, pretending he was worried about me. In reality, he just wanted people to think he had been right all along. The rumors spread faster than I expected. Even distant acquaintances reached out asking if I was okay, or if I needed help finding a new path. It hurt, but I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I chose silence because I knew one day the truth would speak louder than anything Aaron said. Every late night, every skipped meal, every tear I wiped away made me stronger. I learned to stand on my own feet, even when they felt unsteady. And slowly, quietly, I started to become the version of myself that Aaron never thought I could be. With time, school stopped feeling like a place where I was barely surviving and slowly became a place where I wasn't completely alone. It started when I met Rachel Simmons during a lab session. She noticed how tired I looked and asked if I wanted to join her study group. I almost said no out of habit. I was used to doing everything on my own. but something in her calm, friendly tone made me accept. That small yes changed a lot for me. Rachel introduced me to Daniel Brooks, another classmate who was kind, focused, and always willing to help others. The three of us ended up studying together almost every day. They didn't judge me for working multiple jobs, or for the days I came in with barely any sleep. Instead, they quietly supported me. They shared notes when I couldn't attend a class. They helped me review chapters one struggled with. When tuition got tight, Daniel showed me a list of scholarship programs and grants I hadn't even heard of. Rachel helped me apply for them, sitting with me after class to make sure I didn't miss a single detail. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was standing beside me instead of pulling me down. Dr. Harper stayed in my corner too. One afternoon after class, he asked how things were going outside of school. I didn't tell him everything, but I shared enough for him to understand I was still fighting to keep myself steady. He told me about an international medical volunteer program that focused on bringing healthcare to underserved areas. He said, "You have a heart for this kind of work. You should think about applying." I wasn't confident enough to imagine myself doing something so big, but he didn't let me dismiss it. He handed me the application forms himself and told me he would write a recommendation letter. Having people believe in me felt strange at first. After so many years of being told I wasn't enough, kindness made me nervous, almost suspicious. But over time, being around people who supported me started to heal something inside me. Our study sessions became a safe place where I didn't feel judged. Rachel's jokes made even the hardest days easier. Daniel's quiet encouragement reminded me I wasn't fighting alone. Bit by bit, their presence softened the constant tension I carried from my marriage. As the months passed, I noticed something changing within me. I wasn't second-guessing myself as much. I answered more questions in class. I started smiling without forcing it. I didn't walk around feeling like every step was a battle. The fear that had been planted in me, fear of failing, fear of not being enough, began to fade. Aaron had tried to break my confidence, piece by piece. Here, surrounded by people who wanted me to succeed, I started rebuilding it. Not all at once, and not easily, but steadily. I began to see a version of myself that was stronger, more determined, and finally free from the voice that used to tell me I couldn't do it. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was moving forward, not just out of survival, but towards something meaningful. Each small step reminded me that leaving Aaron wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of finally becoming who I was meant to be. Graduation day felt unreal, almost like I was watching someone else live the moment I had dreamed about for so many years. When I walked across the stage and heard my name followed by the words, "with honors," I felt a sharp sting in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I knew how hard I had fought to get there. Every late night, every panic attack, every shift I worked just to survive, it all led to that single moment. I had done something that once felt impossible, something Aaron had sworn I would never achieve. And this time, no one could take it away from me. After graduation, I began my residency in internal medicine at a respected hospital in the city. The days were long and the nights were longer, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I was finally doing the work I had always imagined, treating patients, making decisions that mattered, learning from doctors I admired. Even when I was exhausted, I carried a quiet pride in knowing I had made it here on my own, without shortcuts and without anyone holding the door open for me. A few months into residency, a journalist approached the hospital asking to feature young doctors who had overcome challenges to reach where they were. Somehow, my name ended up on the list. When we met, she listened to my story with more kindness than I expected. I didn't share every detail, but I was honest about the struggles, working 2 jobs, rebuilding myself after a painful marriage, pushing through fear and doubt. When the article came out, my picture was on the front page of the health section. The headline talked about resilience and determination. I didn't think much of it at first, but the story spread quickly around town. People from my old neighborhood started recognizing me in grocery stores, smiling at me, congratulating me. I even received a few letters from students asking for advice about their own careers. It felt strange, but beautiful to know that my journey meant something to someone else. Of course, the news didn't take long to reach Aaron and his family. I didn't need anyone to tell me. They were predictable. I imagined Linda reading the article with disbelief, Charles shaking his head, both of them wondering how the girl they underestimated had managed to rise higher than they ever expected. For years, they had treated my dreams like a joke. Now my reality was louder than anything they used to say. It wasn't long before Aaron tried to contact me. One evening, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, his voice came through the line, hesitant and forced. He congratulated me, then quickly added that he always believed in me. I stayed silent, letting the weight of his lie hang in the air. He tried again, saying he was proud, saying my success made him think about us, saying he wondered if we could talk. But I had nothing left to say to him. I thanked him politely, kept it short, and ended the call. There was no anger left, no bitterness. I didn't need revenge. My life had already given me everything his words tried to take away. My success wasn't built to spite him. It just happened to shine bright enough to reach him, even from far away. And that was enough. It happened on an ordinary afternoon while I was picking up groceries. I didn't expect anyone from my past to appear, but there they were, Linda and Charles, standing together near the produce section, faces tight with anger. I froze for a second, unsure if I should turn around and leave. But they spotted me immediately. Linda stepped forward, her voice low but sharp. "Emily, you've humiliated our family," she said, her eyes glaring. "Do you even realize what you've done to us?" I could feel her words pressing in, trying to make me small, but I didn't back down. I simply looked at her and said, "I didn't humiliate anyone. I worked hard for my life. That's all I did." She huffed and shook her head as if my answer wasn't enough. Then Charles spoke, his tone dripping with blame. "You made Aaron look bad, Emily. You made him look like he failed at life because of you." I wanted to explain that Aaron's choices were his own, but I realized they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for someone to punish, and for once, it wouldn't be me. Before I could walk away, my phone buzzed. It was Aaron. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, his voice came hesitantly. He started rambling about reconnecting, about how he had been thinking, and how maybe we could talk. Then he made the part that made my chest tighten. He asked if I could help him get a job at the hospital where I worked. I could almost hear Linda and Charles cheering him on silently, imagining me bending to his will. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Aaron, I'm glad you're trying to get your life together, but I can't help you with that. You need to figure things out on your own." He hesitated, clearly not expecting that answer, then tried to push further, asking why not and reminding me of everything we shared. I didn't respond to the guilt or the manipulation. I ended the call politely, saying only, "I wish you the best." Turning back to his parents, I held my head high. "I've made my life on my own. I didn't do anything to hurt your family, and I won't take responsibility for Aaron's mistakes. Please don't speak to me like that again." I started moving toward the checkout, ignoring the stunned expressions on their faces. They shouted a few more words after me, but I didn't hear them. For the first time, I felt completely untouchable by their anger. Their fury, their jealousy, their attempts to control me. They no longer had any power over my life. I had built my future without them, and no amount of confrontation could change that. As I pushed my cart down the aisle, I realized something powerful. Standing up for myself didn't require yelling or fighting. It only required knowing my worth, keeping calm, and refusing to bend for people who had never truly supported me. And in that moment, I felt free in a way I never had before. The community ceremony was held at the local civic center, a modest hall filled with families, colleagues, and people who cared about healthcare in our town. I arrived early, feeling a mixture of nerves and pride. I wasn't used to being recognized for my work, but tonight was different. I was being honored for my dedication and perseverance as a young doctor, for the long hours and sacrifices I had made to reach this point. As the ceremony began, I listened to other speakers, feeling a quiet excitement growing inside me. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage in my crisp white coat. Applause filled the room, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not for what I lacked, but for everything I had worked to achieve. I gave a brief speech, thanking my mentors, my friends, and everyone who had supported me, keeping my composure even as my heart swelled with emotion. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed familiar faces in the back row. Aaron, Linda, and Charles were standing together, their expressions frozen in disbelief. I could see the shock on their faces as they realized that the girl they had doubted and tried to hold back had not only survived but thrived. Aaron's jaw tightened, Linda's lips pressed together in frustration, and Charles looked like he had just swallowed something bitter. I kept my attention on the audience, feeling a quiet satisfaction in seeing the truth reflected in their stunned faces. I later learned through mutual acquaintances that Sabrina, the woman Aaron had cheated with, had left him. He had been abandoned by the person he thought would be on his side, and now he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated me, Aaron approached. I could see the hesitation in his step, the way he glanced at his parents before finally speaking. He tried to explain, to apologize, and then, shockingly, he dropped to his knees in front of me. He begged me for another chance, claiming he had always believed in me, and that he regretted everything. I looked down at him calmly, feeling neither anger nor pity. I had worked too hard and come too far to let him manipulate me again. I simply said, "You told me I wasn't enough. Turns out I was too much for you." The words hung in the air, clear and final. I turned and walked away, holding my head high. There was no shouting, no revenge scheme, no grand plan, just the quiet strength of a life rebuilt and a future reclaimed. My success, my dignity, and my confidence were more powerful than anything he or his family could ever take from me. Every accomplishment, every honor, every patient I cared for was a reminder that I didn't need to fight him to win. For the first time, I felt completely free. The anger, the manipulation, the lies, they didn't matter anymore. I had achieved what they said I never could, and in doing so, I had already given myself the ultimate revenge. My life, my success, and my peace were proof that I had risen above them all. A few years later, I reached a milestone I had only dared to dream about when I was struggling to survive, my first home. It wasn't huge or luxurious, just a cozy place I could call my own, with a small garden and enough space to breathe. I remembered the times Aaron and his family mocked me for ever thinking I could afford such a thing, telling me I should aim lower, that it wasn't realistic. Standing in the living room, holding the keys in my hands, I smiled quietly. This was mine, earned with hard work, determination, and patience, and no one could take it away. Owning a home was only one part of the life I was building. I began reaching out to young women entering medical school, offering guidance and support. I wanted to be the mentor I had needed when I was at my lowest. Sharing my story, teaching them how to manage the pressures of school, work, and life outside of medicine, and helping them believe in themselves brought a new sense of purpose. Their excitement reminded me of the fire I had almost lost, and it strengthened me to see them grow confident in their own abilities. Life also brought love in ways I didn't expect. I met someone who respected my ambition and shared my values. He wasn't the center of my happiness, just a companion who appreciated me for who I was. For the first time, I felt that balance between independence and connection. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I simply enjoyed having someone who walked beside me rather than in front or behind. Looking back, I realized something important about the journey I had been on. The years of struggle, the betrayal, the emotional manipulation, they were painful, but they also taught me lessons I wouldn't have learned any other way. I understood that the best revenge wasn't seeking to hurt Aaron or his family. The true revenge was living my life fully, proving their doubts wrong, and building a future on my own terms without ever trying to retaliate. My success, happiness, and peace became their answer. I also understood the value of resilience. Life isn't about avoiding hardship, it's about how you respond to it. Each setback, each challenge, had forced me to discover strength I didn't know I had. I learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, and to never let anyone else define my worth. That knowledge became my foundation. As I settled into my home, mentoring young doctors, and watching my life grow in ways I once thought impossible, I felt a deep sense of closure. The girl who once doubted herself had become a woman who knew her value and refused to compromise it. The lessons, the struggle, and the victories all came together to create a life that was authentically mine. In the end, I had reclaimed myself completely. My story became more than a tale of hardship. It became a story of resilience, strength, and self-worth. A reminder that even when others try to hold you back, you have the power to rise, thrive, and create a life beyond their imagination.